God bless you guys, and welcome to day number 1 of our 20-day devotional on Holy Week, where we're going to be covering the events that brought Jesus to the cross, the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Today's verse that we're going to consider is John chapter 11, verse 25 to 27. It seems is going to seem like a very odd and interesting start for this devotional about Holy Week, because at first you're going to say, what does this have to do with Holy Week? This is some other random event. But after today's devotional, I pray that you're going to see how this is directly connected with Holy Week and everything that happens on that day. So, John chapter 11, verse 25 to 27 reads this way. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. So many of us know this story already as the story of Lazarus when Jesus Christ resurrects Lazarus from the dead. Many of us know the story, and it begins by Mary and Martha sending a word to Jesus to let him know that, you know, Jesus, your friend, the one that you love, he's sick. And the interesting response that Jesus gives, he begins, and I want you to look at it. It's in John chapter 11, the beginning of the chapter, where Jesus tells his disciples, because Jesus is not that far away, but he's with his disciples in another town. And he tells the disciples, I need you guys to pay attention to what's about to happen, because this is not for Lazarus's death. This is for the glory of God. And I begin to see this as Jesus setting up the atmosphere for what's about to happen. So I just want you to keep that in mind, because we're going to keep repeating that idea that Jesus Christ was setting the atmosphere for what's coming. Well, Jesus stays there a little bit longer, 2 days extra. Lazarus actually dies. Jesus comes to the town where Lazarus is dead. Mary and Martha, they come up to Jesus, and basically Martha comes up to Jesus first, and she's like, if you was here, he would never have died. And Jesus says these words to her. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was come into the world. Now, we know the story. Jesus tells the people to roll the stone away, and then with a word of command, Jesus says, Lazarus, come forth. Lazarus comes out of the tomb. He's wrapped up in the linens. He's wrapped up, and he commands them to loose him out of his wrappings, and he begins to join the family once again. He eats with the family, and it's a long story of what begins to happen in Lazarus's life. But what happens with this miracle causes a chain reaction of chatter and events, and literally, today we know this as it going viral. Lazarus resurrecting from the dead, Jesus doing this miracle in his life, begins a talk around the town. Now, I just want to say that it was not a coincidence that just a couple of days before Jesus goes into Jerusalem, Jesus performs this miracle with Lazarus. It's like God was literally coordinating events right before Jesus was going to go to the cross. Now, I need you to understand the connection between Lazarus's death and resurrection to Passion Week. See, Jesus did this miracle at the same time when Passover was coming, and there were thousands of people from all over, all different lands. They were flocking to Jerusalem because they were coming to celebrate the Passover. Now, when Jesus resurrects Lazarus, everyone goes back to their houses and their towns. And what are they all talking about? They're all talking about how Jesus resurrected Lazarus and how he performed this incredible miracle. Now, up until this point, Jesus was telling everyone that he did miracles on. He was always telling, nope, I did this miracle. Don't say anything. Oh, this person was healed. Keep it to yourself. Don't share it. And Jesus kept saying, and you can find this in John chapter 7, verse 6. He says, my time is not yet come. Don't tell anyone what's happening. But now, with the miracle of Lazarus, it's the opposite situation. It's completely opposite. Now, Jesus is no longer going here and going there on the side streets. Jesus is now going in the center stage, and he's not hiding from anyone, and he's performing miracles. He's doing all these things on the side, but now with Lazarus, he wants everyone to start talking. And we actually see this confirmation in the next chapter, in John chapter 12, when Jesus goes into Jerusalem. What is everybody talking about? They're talking about, listen, there's this guy coming. His name is Jesus. He resurrected Lazarus from the dead. He could be the Messiah. He could be the one that we've been waiting for. And everyone in Jerusalem is looking and expecting for this man named Jesus, the possible Messiah. And they're expecting and they're waiting for him to come into Jerusalem. And this begins to set up the scene on Palm Sunday, what a lot of us know as Palm Sunday. Many of us know it as the triumphant entry into Jerusalem. Well, the event of Lazarus dying and resurrecting is the atmosphere that Jesus creates in order for people to welcome him when he comes into Jerusalem. He was setting it up so that people can start talking about. And what were they talking about when he goes into Jerusalem? It says, this is the one that resurrected Lazarus. And Jesus actually says this. He says in John chapter 12, verse 23, he says, the hour has come. My emphasis has. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. In other words, no more doing ministry and miracles on the sides where people are not watching or people can just talk about it in quiet. Now, this is going to be the time where everyone's going to know who I am and what I'm doing. And it's so amazing how God coordinated thousands of extra people into Jerusalem to be able to hear this news about Jesus. It's not a coincidence. I can go on and on talking about why God would have so many people come to the town during that time to hear about Lazarus and to hear about Jesus right before he would be crucified, soon before he would be crucified. So it's not a coincidence that Jesus resurrects Lazarus right during the Passover time and right before his entry into Jerusalem, a week before his death on the cross. What would people be talking about? They'd be talking about Jesus. What would be talking about? They'll be talking about how he resurrected Lazarus. So how does all this connect to leading Jesus up to the death on the cross and his resurrection? Listen, as you read John chapter 11 and John chapter 12, which after this devotional, I encourage you to do that, you're going to see the connection about how Lazarus's death and resurrection, that story pulls into Holy Week and how they begin to plot out the death of Lazarus and Jesus, because the religious folk of that time, they didn't want to have anything to do with Jesus. They wanted to cut this guy down and stop him. So they started to make a plan to get him killed, to kill Jesus. So that Lazarus's death and resurrection pulls into Palm Sunday and pulls into the plot to arrest and to kill Jesus. Amen. And remember, it connects as well, because now everyone's talking about this resurrection of Lazarus. Okay, but remember, it also pulls into when Jesus said that that you can destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up again. But he wasn't talking about the temple, the building. He was talking about his body. He was talking about his own death. So we see that also that the death and resurrection of Lazarus is going to be a foreshadow. It's going to be leading up to what Jesus himself was going to do. And I want you to look at these parallels, things that happened with Lazarus that happened with Jesus as well. And I'm talking about Lazarus, and see how the connection is exactly the same with Jesus. Lazarus, he was in the tomb for several days, and the stone was called to be removed. Upon the command of God, he was resurrected and he walked out of the tomb. The bandages were removed. He was alive. He spoke. He ate. People saw him, and God got the glory. And you see how this is a foreshadow of what Jesus himself was getting ready to do. Resurrection was something that they were going to be talking about, and then they would be reminded that, wait, Jesus also said that he was going to be resurrected, and he was going to lay his own life down and pick it up again. So, the story about Lazarus is closely connected to the death and resurrection because it sets the scene for what is about to happen and what everybody's going to start to talk about. It was a major miracle and event that Jesus uses to set up the death and his own resurrection. Guys, I pray that today's lesson started to help you to understand the setup and how God allows situations to happen to set up his purpose, his plan, and what things he wants to execute in our lives and in this world. God bless you guys. I pray that today's devotional was a blessing for you and helped you to learn something today, the setup for Holy Week. God bless you guys, and I will see you in the next video in day 2.